This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
There are lots of moonwalking bears in our world. Lots of things that pull our eyes and our minds and our hearts away from where they should be. We will only see what we focus on. If we focus on the things of the world, we will miss the blessings and the visions that Jesus has for us and the call that he has for us. And it was so interesting. It caught me the first couple of times I watched it too, because you're focused on, and you all did great on the count. You all had 13. Because it's like, okay, yeah. And all the while, there's this crazy looking guy in a bear costume going across, and you don't even think about that because that's not what you're looking for. But like the moonwalking bear, we often miss what's right in front of us. Maintaining focus on our journey of faith can be the difference between partaking of everything God has for us and missing out on the truly important things. We have to stay focused on him, or we miss the important things. When Abram traveled to Egypt, he took his focus from God and began to worry about what others might think. He became focused with all the things he imagined they will do instead of focusing on God's will. Eventually, Abraham was completely preoccupied with thoughts of his own safety and happiness. He was focused on himself. As a result, Abram forgot God's promises to bless and protect him. God said, I will take care of you. Stay with me, stay connected to me. But he didn't. In the end, his action brought troubles upon Pharaoh's house. And only by the grace of God was Abram and Sarai saved. It's interesting that God used a non-believer to save Abram and Sarai. And if we pay attention, that happens a lot in our world. God uses the unlikely and the unusual to show us that our focus needs to go back to him. Okay. Jason saw, I just for fun, I was tucking some Easter eggs into the pictures that go with the first one, and he just noticed it. Chapter 13 begins, and we just read that. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Abram did not allow a lapse of his faith to become a complete collapse of faith. He didn't allow one mistake to change his life to all mistakes. And that's something that we have to be careful with, because sometimes we'll do something wrong, and that will make us think that we're not worthwhile, that we can't do anything wrong, or that everything we do is wrong. Abram took the lessons he learned and went back to where he needed to be for his faith to grow again. When we stumble, when we fall back, when we fail God in our walk of faith, it does not mean that we need to go back to the beginning. We just keep going from where we stumbled. If you're running a race and you fall, you just get up and keep going. You don't go back to the start and wait for somebody to fire the pistol in the air again so you can go again. You just get up from where you are, recognized that it was a fall, and move forward again. Failing God doesn't mean that we continue to fail him, or that God no longer wants to use us, or no longer has a use for us in his kingdom. He still wants to use us. That's why we were created. He wants to use us. So it doesn't matter what mistakes you've made, just refocus on God and say, okay, God, keep me going. Nearly every hero of faith in the Bible has at some point in their faith walk failed. Abram was a liar, Moses a murderer, David was an adulterer and a murderer, indirectly. Thomas doubted Paul, one of the main writer of the New Testament, sent Christians to their death and probably contributed, probably was active at times in killing believers in Jesus. Our failures do not define or limit God's work in our lives. What does Paul say to the Corinthian church, the most troubled church in the New Testament? They were bickering with each other. They were suing each other. They were tolerating incestuous relationships. But Paul doesn't give up on them. He writes them at least 4 letters, 2 of which we read in our New Testament, and not one of which says, God has had enough of you. You have failed and you are of no use of value to the kingdom. Instead, he writes, and he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I delight in weakness. Isn't that a crazy thing to say? I delight in weakness? We hate being weak. We hate it when we're ill and we can't do what we want to do. But Paul delights in weakness, and in insults and distress and persecutions, in difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong. If you have failed God in your walk of faith, the testimony of Abram and the message of the Bible is that God is eager to forgive you and to give you strength and victory to get up and go, keep going. So Abram goes back to the Negev, and almost immediately his faith is tested again. It's important to note that the proving and the testing of our faith is not a one-time thing. It's not a one and done. You know, there would be times it would be nice if we could just prove that we're faithful and then that's it. But it's not a singular act. Faith is not an algebra test where we sit down for the final exam and we prove that we can do it and then we pass the class and we're done. Praise the Lord, we never have to figure out an irreducible polynomial equation. Anybody remember that even? I don't even remember those. I remember the name, so I obviously did it, but it was so long ago. But even if we really figured it out the first time, faith is more like the brakes on a car. We're going to push on those brakes again and again and again, probably multiple times on the same trip, and even more in the Emirates because of all the roundabouts and speed bumps. Every morning or every time we take a trip, we push on those brakes again and again. That is a test, a trial of that braking system. As soon as there's a grinding noise, a squeak, a difference in response, we have to get that car into the shop to make sure the brakes are going to work again. Every little test that helps us to arrive safely where we are going when those brakes work. Returning to Abram, we read that the land could not support both he and Lot. But we go back to Lot and Abram. Their herdsmen begin to argue. There's not enough good land for all of us. I can't, my camel don't have enough grazing land and my sheep don't have enough water. Then fighting back and forth over who had what or needed what. Abram has just been kicked out of Egypt. He can't go back there. So what's he going to do? In verse 7, now the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land at that time. Lot and Abram were sharing this land with other people who were already there, who were paying attention. And this is an interesting part of this. The Perizzites, the Canaanites, were paying attention to how the followers of this one God were conducting themselves. They were watching these new people that had just showed up. Lot and Abram had an audience. Make no mistake about it, an unbelieving world, a world of other faiths, is watching us. Theologian and author Brennan Manning famously said, the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, walk out the door, and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. If you follow social media at all, That's one of the big things you see. It's like, how can they be like this? How did they do this? Why do they do this? They say one thing, but they do another. It's hypocrisy. It's wrong. And so people are watching us and paying attention. They're paying attention to us in the shopping mall. They're paying attention to us at the gas station. Wherever they meet us, they're paying attention to us and our actions. We, and that is us. We've got Kuwait in there, got Dubai in there, got Muscat, I think, no, that's Sohar, Muscat, and us. The world is paying attention to us wherever we go. We have an audience who watches our interactions with one another, even amongst Christians. People are watching, seeing how we interact. We represent Christ and Christianity to someone. Psalm 133, the whole thing says, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is for brothers to live together in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down upon the beard as on Aaron's beard, the oil which ran down the edge of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, coming down upon the mountains of Zion. For the Lord commanded the blessing there, life forever." Really quick, let's read how good and pleasant. Let's read this together. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. You know, the psalm goes on to give you even more kind of add to it, to affirm it, but that's enough. You know, we just need to be unified. Warren Wiersbe sums up the message of this psalm like this: Christian unity is fragrant and fruitful, but disunity turns that fragrance into a stench and the garden into a desert. The testimony Abram left in Egypt was one of selfishness, which brought sickness and disrepute. He hurt the Pharaoh's household. God was giving Abram a second chance to demonstrate a life of faith to peoples who did not know or understand worship of a singular living God. We all of us, have an opportunity every day to live out our convictions before a world which does not acknowledge or know Jesus Christ. And that is even more challenging in a place like this, where the majority don't live or believe like we do. And we want them to see. And sometimes, because we can't use our words, they watch how we live. Abram chooses unity. He says, "Please let there be no strife." And then he goes one step further in promoting peace by allowing Lot his choice of the land. He gives him first pick. And what's Lot going to do? She's going to take the best land. I think any of us would think, oh, that's a green, there's grass, and there's hay, and there's all kinds of good food for my animals. I'm taking that. And Abram allows him. He says, you get first pick. Abram was the elder, didn't have to. Abram had every right and would have been expected to choose first, but no. He graciously says, you choose. Furthermore, God had promised Abram the land. It is surprising that Abram does not hold firm to the very thing that God had promised him. Lot had no right to any of it, but Lot looks around and chooses for himself. Again, those words indicate selfishness, for himself, the very best of what he sees. Sometimes faith means letting God be the defender of our rights, letting God bring justice in God's time. Abram trusted in God's goodness and justice to the point that he would even allow Lot to take some of the land that God had promised to him. We can become so preoccupied with what we deserve or think we deserve and making things right that we forget God is ultimately responsible for God's justice. Romans 12 tells us, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all people. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Faithfulness often means choosing the path of generosity over the path of strife and conflict. It means that we choose love before we choose condemnation. So often, when someone hurts us, we want to judge and condemn. We want to get angry. We want to get all uptight because we are right. They had no right to hurt me or do that to me. No. God says, love your enemy. Love one another. Be generous. So, God tells us to choose others before self. And that is so hard. Our first instinct is to take care of ourselves. And that makes some sense. We need to survive. But after that, God says, be generous, give, love, don't judge, don't condemn. That's my job. I'll take care of you. You worry about you, I'll worry about everyone else. Having faith is trusting in God's providence and care, even if it seems to make no sense. Abram had no idea what would happen to Sodom, the choice land that Lot chose. He only knew that God would take care of him. And later we learn in Genesis 19, then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven, to the point that the land smoked like a furnace. Lot ended up not having such good land after all. Abram was faithful, and God took care of the rest. In contrast to Lot, who looked upon his own and evaluated the land that he wanted while ignoring the wicked actions of the people in that land. He knew the people there were wicked. But instead of choosing this land, that was maybe not such good grazing land, but the people there were good, he said, nah, I'm taking the choice land. I don't care what the people there believe or do, but I want that. It's kind of the shiny, the glitzy, the glam land. I want that. That's going to be the best for me. And it didn't happen. Abram waited for God to instruct him. In verses 14 through 16, God says, now raise your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward, eastward and westward. And I still don't have those directions straight here. It's like I go out on the front step and the sun goes down over that way. So that's got to be west. And yeah, my directions here are still. But God says, look, north, south, east, west, for all the land which you see, I will give to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as plentiful as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can count the dust of the earth, then your descendants could also be counted. Lot looked at the land. Abram looked to God. Abram had learned that faithfulness means waiting for God's time and God's vision. Faithfulness is keeping our focus on Jesus despite the moonwalking bears of wealth, popularity, recognition, and everything else the world tries to tempt us with. It is determining where our focus will be even before the distractions come our way. It is looking where and when God tells us to. Even if our faith has failed us at times, and it has, and it probably will. I don't want to sound discouraging, but our faith falters because we're sinners. But God still has a vision and plan for us, for you, for me, or Moses, or David, Thomas, Peter, Paul. He's certainly not going to give up on you. His grace is enough to cover our failures and to give us a new vision of his faithfulness. His peace, his strength is going to allow us to get up and move forward again on his path, not our path, his path. Today might just be the day that we turn our eyes away from the distractions of the world. We close our eyes to those lush plains of Sodom and their empty promises of the future so that God can fill us with his eternal promises. It means that we put aside the petty jealousies and strife that we have adopted from an impatient, focused, me-focused culture and allow God to be God again. So often we try to be God for ourselves. And every time we try it, what happens? We fail. Everything comes crashing down around us. Today, we can reignite our faith by simply turning our eyes to Jesus and allowing the things of this earth, our trials, our worries, our troubles, to grow dim in the light of His glory and grace.